Well, my name is John Byrne. I'm from Belfast, but I've been living here in Dublin, living and working here in Dublin for the last 28 years. I can't believe it's that long. I'm a retired performance artist, but I've been planning to come out of retirement for some time. But in the meantime, I've intermittently made a number of public artworks in and around Dublin, and this is the newest of them, and it's called The Contest. I'm aware from the commissioning brief and process that the earliest example of commissioned public artwork was the allegory of good and bad government in Siena, wasn't it, in the 14th century? You know, it's a double-edged sword, really. Government from an artist's perspective is often seen as bad and the target of any self-respecting subversive artist's practice. But I'm happy with any kind of governance that allows me to make new work. I mean, public artwork is and working with the public and for the public in the public realm is a space that I seem to be happy with, yeah. And I like working with ordinary people, whatever ordinary people are. The idea came from the physical shape of Fingal itself, you know, a place that encompasses both urban Dublin and rural Ireland. And I think a lot of us have this kind of pull or this draw to and from country and city. I know I have, and it's Dublin is getting bigger and bigger as are cities throughout the world. So the traffic is mostly one way, and we should be pulled or drawn towards more sustainable ways of living, towards more sustainable lifestyles, more elemental ways of living. And it's a metaphor for that challenge, or that contest is the title of the piece, and how we live in and respect the contested space that is Fingal itself. Well, I'm so grateful, and it's amazing to be alive in Ireland at this particular time, but it's also kind of terrifying. You know, we're faced with all sorts of ecological, societal and political challenges, but I think it's about that complex idea of making progress. Like, what is that? And politicians used to have this kind of mantra, going forward, which is somewhat comical, I suppose, in hindsight. But I always loved that John Lennon lyric. How can I go forward when I don't know which way I'm facing? I think it's about confusion as well. I mean, who wouldn't be confused in the face of all this stuff? I think sometimes you make more interesting work or engaging work if you reference good work. So I did, of course, that with The Last Supper. I heavily referenced Da Vinci's Last Supper to make Dublin's Last Supper, and I think that's part of its success. So as with Dublin's Last Supper, I went looking for two large groups of people, ideally, figurative paintings that I could somehow combine. So when I considered Géricault's work, The Raft of the Medusa and Delacroix's Liberty Leading the People, once I'd considered them, I kept coming back to them and finally settled on them as references for this new piece. And the thing is that when you brought it together, they're both good examples of using the golden triangle device for making harmonious compositions. So with bringing two groups together, as I did, and creating essentially an upside down triangle in the middle, I think the idea was that the composition would sit together as a whole. They're both set at times of great political upheaval in France, and I thought that was valid to cross-reference that for here and now. It's interesting as well how the Irish flag has a connection with France and Paris in particular. It was Thomas Francis Meagher, the young Irelander back, I think it was 1848, and there was a group of French women made an Irish tricolour. The first time an Irish tricolour was made, it was green, white and orange, and they presented him with this, and he took it back to Waterford, and I thought it was quite apt to, in a way, replace the French tricolour with the Irish tricolour for this picture. So I did consider using other flags, and I thought about having a hole in the flag, but yeah, the flag is flawed, and I think all flags are flawed. It was hard to, obviously I wanted to frame the picture with a genuine Fingal background and something that would be recognisable as such. So I looked around and I again, a bit like the paintings I referenced, I landed on Ireland's Eye and, a beach along there, which is somewhere that I would have gone a lot with the kids, and up until recently I go walks there, so it's somewhere that I'm familiar with. And, there are golf courses along there. So the golf course is kind of like a pseudo-urban space, a sort of extravagant use of land. And the beach draft, is almost like, shelter. Well, approaching strangers on the street is something that I've done over the years. So when I made The Last Supper, I cast it totally from people on the streets of Dublin. Well, there were a couple of people that I knew previously, but other than that, it was from street casting. So with the contest, I did the same. I walked up and down the main street of Swords, but we also did open calls and in local newspapers and on social media. And I suppose I was really looking for a cross-section of the populace of Fingal. I wanted older people, younger people, middle-aged people, people that, from different disciplines, people from different communities. I wanted to represent the Fingal of today. It always amazes me how amazing people are and how much energy they put into something that, is just sort of landed on them. And no, it's been great. So when I made The Last Supper back in 2004, I can't believe it was 20 years ago, the first time I worked with the photographer Jonathan Hessian, we obviously weren't going to capture such a broad image in one go, so we devised a way of photographing, 1, 2 or 3 individuals at a time and moving the table along and keeping the camera and the lights absolutely static so that light and shade and the shadows were all consistent. So with the contest, I decided to do the same again, work with in the same way, but of course it was a much grander scale, so we had to have 2 large sets made, which were each 4 meters wide and nearly 4 meters deep, and then one was covered in sand and one was covered in grass, and so they were on casters. It was also important to photograph people at depth, so that we maintained a sort of depth of field. So people at the back, for example, would have been photographed separately from people in the middle and the front of the stage. And of course, when you're working with small groups of people, you have much more control over directing that small group. I mean, it would be impossible to direct 50 odd people. So yeah, I suppose when you direct people at that scale in those small groups, you're more likely to have a painterly quality. It was important that I didn't, it didn't look like a fancy dress thing. I didn't want to really dress people up. And I wanted people to wear contemporary clothing. I mean, there were exceptions to that. Like my daughter Anya, for example, designed a very, very, very wiry outfit for a character who's just to the side of the Liberty with a flag. And we had mummers. There's a tradition of mumming in Fingal, so it was important to me that was included. And props wise, I like this idea of the canary in the cage. So there's a character in the picture, Tommy O'Keefe, who's a bird fancier, and he brought along his canary in the cage. I borrowed this incredible model of that amazing church in Lusk, and I had someone hold it, and that's the kind of thing you'd see in medieval paintings or stained glass windows. And on the urban side, there's people holding little golden houses. There's a lot of house building in Fingal. There's a lot of urban sprawl, as they say, but not everybody gets a house, and it speaks to that burning issue. The contest was much more complex in terms of obviously numbers and its depth and its three-dimensional nature. So and the rope pullers. So I'm not someone who's naturally at home with spatial physics. So I was very anxious to make sure I wasn't going to be tripped up by some kind of law of physics in terms of bringing all this thing together. So I kind of experimented. I thought if I could put it together at this scale, surely the thing at the grander scale will work. And I did three-dimensional drawings of the thing, and because it was pretty. It was there was a bit of madness, and it wasn't quite chaos, but when I look back, I'm quite relieved that we did make sense of it in the end. But we got through it, and Photoshop, it's a dirty word, but it's a very versatile tool, and you wouldn't know I'd used it, would you? Don't tell anybody. I'm just really relieved and delighted that it's actually finally finished, apart from tweaking that cloud and fixing that bit of sand. I'm not joking, But it's great for everybody in it that we finally got, a finished piece of work, and and it'll be in the library for a month or two, I think, and it's great that people will see it and can take ownership over it, and that one day it will be in the Swords new cultural quarter, and it'll be installed there in some permanent fashion, and it will be a legacy for all of us who worked on it, and it'll be a legacy for all the people of Swords and Fingal. I'm just so grateful for all the people that have worked with me on this, who will feature in the picture. I'm just amazed by people's generosity, and that they placed their trust in me, and that's something that I can never take for granted.